development contained in the RFS-2 when authorized under the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 pertains to the requirement that all renewable fuels must achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions compared to a petroleum fuel baseline. The regulations represent a sea change in U.S. policy by both assessing greenhouse gas performance and creating greenhouse gas-based fuel volume mandates for the first time. These innovations are attributable not to the EPA, but to the Congress who developed the framework and requirements of ESA. With the passage of ESA, also otherwise known as the Energy Independence Security Act of 2007, the EPA was empowered with the responsibility to create a comprehensive new system of greenhouse gas analysis, categorization, and enforcement in fuels. In short, the EPA requires a well-to-wheels greenhouse gas lifecycle analysis, or LCA, that examines all factors impacting greenhouse gas performance for a particular fuel. These factors can include where and how feedstocks are sourced, the conversion technology, energy source of the plant, among other aspects. By evaluating this data, as well as much more, the EPA could make a technical determination based on the results of the assessment that a petitioned fuel pathway qualifies for an RFS-2 renewable fuel category. I know it sounds kind of technical, and I guess it is somewhat, but I've basically told you everything I know about the petition process for renewable fuel pathways. And with that, I'll now move on to introduce our first speaker for today. Aaron Levy is joining us today from U.S. EPA's Office of Transportation and Air Quality in Washington, D.C. Aaron is a program analyst and is the staff lead for evaluating new fuel pathways under the Renewable Fuel Standard program and determine if they meet the required life cycle greenhouse gas reduction thresholds for qualification. We're grateful to have Mr. Levy with us here today to discuss the petition process and what is needed for EPA to make a timely determination. And from what I understand, EPA is looking to improve and streamline the process, and we'll be looking to stakeholders for input. Aaron, thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn the controls over to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Great. So yes, my name is Aaron Levy. I'm with the U.S. EPA, and I work in the Office of Transportation and Air Quality, and I'm based here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This is where we have our vehicle testing lab, where the EPA MPG ratings are put together. We also have an office building here, which is where I'm sitting. And the director of my office goes back and forth between Washington, D.C. and here in Ann Arbor. And thanks for joining the webinar today, despite the fact that the basketball tournament has started. I know my alma mater, Wisconsin, is playing right now, but I'm happy to be talking to you all about the Renewable Fuel Standard. Okay, I just figured out the slide controls here. Okay, so here's an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. US RFS program, as Brent talked about. I think folks on the line understand the basics of that, but I'm going to give a little introduction and some background related to evaluating renewable fuel pathways. And I'm also going to talk about the life cycle greenhouse gas analysis that we've done as part of the program, some of the pathways that we've already evaluated and approved, and then I'm going to get into some more of the details on the petition process for new renewable fuel pathways that we have not yet approved. And then there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. So here's an overview of some of the key aspects of the program. As you may know, it was amended in 2007 by Congress in the Energy Independence and Security Act, and it includes increasing volumes to the year 2022. It includes 4 categories of renewable fuels: cellulosic biofuel, biomass-based diesel, advanced biofuel, and total renewable fuel. And some of those categories have some nesting involved in them. Cellulosic biofuel and biomass-based diesel are both in the advanced biofuel category. Some key aspects for what I'm going to talk about are the qualifications. As Brent mentioned, there are life cycle greenhouse gas reduction thresholds for the different categories of renewable fuel. Any fuel to qualify as general renewable fuel needs to meet a 20% life cycle greenhouse gas reduction compared to the petroleum baseline. Advanced biofuel needs to meet a 50% reduction, and so does the biodiesel. and cellulosic biofuel needs to meet a 60% reduction. There's also restrictions in the Act on what qualifies as renewable biomass and what types of land renewable biomass can be grown on. And finally, I'll just mention that there is also a grandfathering provision for biofuel production facilities that were already under construction or doing production at the time of enactment of the Act in December 2007. Those facilities are grandfathered to generate credits or RINs under the program for under the total renewable fuel category. In order to qualify for one of the other categories, advanced biofuel, biodiesel, or cellulosic, they would need to demonstrate the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for their pathway. So I'm going to talk here about our life cycle modeling approach. The Energy Independence and Security Act provided a fairly expansive definition of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for the renewable fuels we needed to evaluate. It was a pretty large undertaking, and especially because the definition includes the fact that the life cycle emissions need to include significant indirect emissions, such as significant emissions from land use changes. That involved, agricultural sector modeling to look at what those land use change impacts would be. And it was an extensive process that I'll talk about on the next slide, involving public comment and peer review over a couple of years. Part of that is also comparing the life cycle emissions of renewable fuel pathways to the petroleum baseline. Renewable fuels are compared to either gasoline or diesel, and as specified in the statute, it's compared to the average gasoline or diesel in the year 2005. So some more about the process that we went through to develop that life cycle analysis. We coordinated along the way very closely with USDA and DOE. USDA because, especially on the feedstock production side, a lot of the modeling got into agricultural sector issues where USDA had more expertise than us, and also DOE, especially DOE biomass on some of the feedstock production side. We also had many meetings with stakeholders and collected lots of data related to the analysis. And there was that process started in 2007 when the law was passed, and the final rule with our final life cycle results was published in March 2010. And the process during that time period included a 120-day public comment period after we put out our proposed rule. We had public workshops and independent peer reviews on key aspects of our life cycle analysis, and all of that was considered in developing our methodology and our determinations in the March 2010 rule. So in that March 2010 rule, we evaluated and made determinations for a number of fuel pathways for major biofuels. And so what do I mean when I talk about a fuel pathway? We define pathway as a unique combination of three components: a type of fuel, for example, biodiesel; a feedstock, for example, soybean oil; and a production process to convert the feedstock to a fuel, for example, transesterification for biodiesel or a hydrotreating process for renewable diesel. And each combination of those three components would be what we would describe as a pathway. And so what are some of the qualified? So as I mentioned, in March 2010 rule, we qualified a number of the most widely used biofuel pathways at the time. Some examples of pathways that we've approved include, soybean oil biodiesel, some of the ones that you see listed here on the slide. We have a number of cellulosic biofuel pathways, including switchgrass. We've also approved renewable gasoline and renewable diesel from a number of different feedstocks, separated food waste, separated MSW, and there's others that are listed in a lookup table in our regulations, and you can find the regulations on our website. So in that March 2010 final rule, while we did evaluate what we saw as the major fuel pathways at the time, we also acknowledged that we weren't able to look at all the possible fuel pathways. Some of them we couldn't have thought of, or hadn't been invented yet, and I'm sure there will be hopefully new pathways that will be developed that we haven't thought of yet. So what we did is provided a petition process for companies to come to us to request our evaluation of new pathways that we hadn't evaluated yet, to determine what thresholds they would meet and what D codes they would qualify for, meaning would they qualify as advanced biofuel, cellulosic biofuel, etc. So there's a few different types of petitions that come out of this. Our regulations specify types of information that are required for all petitions. Basic information about the pathway, technical justification, mass and energy balance data necessary to do a life cycle analysis, company information, things like that. That applies for all types of petitions. For petitions involving new feedstocks, there's additional data requirements because evaluating new feedstocks. One second. Sorry about the noise there. Evaluating new feedstocks requires additional analysis by us because of the indirect emissions and land use change factors that we have to consider, which is why there's additional data requirements for new feedstock petitions. And those petitions for new feedstocks do tend to take longer to evaluate because of the additional pieces of the analysis that come into play. So in addition to having different types of information that needs to be submitted, there's different types of determinations that we can make based on those petitions. We can make determinations for generally applicable pathways, meaning any company is using the pathway, the three components of the pathway are eligible to use that pathway to generate RINs. We can also make company-specific determinations. Making a generally applicable determination requires a rulemaking process because it requires us to revise our regulations and add the pathway into the Code of Federal Regulations. A company-specific determination we can do without a full rulemaking process because the Act in 2007 gave us some authorities to do that after review by the EPA administrator. So we have made a number of both types. We've since March 2010 we've revised that Table 1 in the regulations to add additionally general pathways, and we've also posted company-specific determinations to our website. The company-specific determinations to date have been for new production processes primarily. So those are typically companies using feedstocks and making types of fuels that we have looked at previously, but just using a slightly different fuel production technology. We do have quite a few petitions that are currently under review, around 35, and we actually post a list of the petitions that are under review on our website. I think it's fair to say that we have received more petitions and it's taken longer to review them than we anticipated when we created this petition process in 2010. As I mentioned before, the new feedstock petitions tend to take longer to evaluate because they often require substantial amounts of new modeling and analysis, especially for kind of major types of new feedstocks that use land and are significantly different than feedstocks we've looked at. Other types of petitions, like I mentioned, that are just using a slightly different production technology are less involved, and we do tend to process those faster. But again, all petition reviews in general, I think, have taken longer than we anticipated because of various complications that come up along the way. And I mentioned here's the website link to where you can see which petitions are under review. For some of the reasons I just mentioned, we recognize that there's significant improvements that we feel need to be made in our petition process, things that can be standardized and streamlined. So just recently, March 13th, actually, we posted this program announcement on our website, letting folks know that we're taking steps to improve the petition process, and I'll get into some of the elements that we're going to do, but you can find this program announcement on our website at the link provided there. Some of the key elements that we're going to be looking at as part of that process over the next 6 months are listed here. One of them is to do what a lean government exercise, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the lean approach, but it's a kind of a consulting approach that organizations and companies use to streamline their operations. We've started that process and created a kind of mapped out all of the steps in our process and identified areas where we're doing value added and things we've started identifying areas where we think we can kind of trim out some wasteful steps. So we're hopeful that lean exercise, and we have folks at EPA who specialize in that and are helping us with that. And we're hopeful that that'll help streamline our processes internally. We're also there's also things that petitioners, I think, can do to help improve this process a lot. And in order for them to do that, we're looking to provide improved guidance to them on what to do when they're thinking about submitting a petition and when they're actually submitting one. We're going to be putting out additional instructions and application templates with the goal of really standardizing the types of petitions we get. Up to now, the regulations have a list of required information, but petitions have come in all shapes and sizes. What we'd like to do is really create application templates, and maybe even someday having a web-based submission process so that they all come in a very standardized format to streamline our review. We'd also, the last bullet may be less relevant to the folks on this webinar, but I'll just mention, you know, a significant amount of the petitions we've gotten have been for kind of very traditional biofuel pathways like corn ethanol, because there's only certain types of corn ethanol plants that meet the 20% threshold. And we've received quite a few petitions from dry mill plants that are using different technologies to meet that threshold. And what we're going to be trying to do is develop kind of a more automated process to handle those petitions so that we can spend more of our staff time reviewing kind of the advanced biofuel and cellulosic pathways. So this will be, you know, a significant amount of our focus over the next 6 months is improving this petition process. We think it'll have significant long-term benefits. But during that time, we will continue to review some of the petitions that we have, especially petitions that we consider higher priority. And that gets into this next slide, which talks about how we're prioritizing some of the petition reviews. In the program announcement, we put forth these criteria on how we're prioritizing petition reviews. At the top of our priority list is cellulosic biofuels, because as Brent mentioned in his introduction, you know, that's an area where we definitely feel like, you know, we haven't been meeting the initial targets set by Congress. So clearly that's a priority in this program, is to get as much biofuel, cellulosic biofuel, into the market to meet those targets. Another criteria is pathways that kind of have the potential to be advanced biofuel by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And one indicator of that is, you know, non-food feedstocks, because our analysis has shown that non-food feedstocks tend to have less indirect land use change emissions. And that also just aligns nicely with the fact that those feedstocks require less involved modeling. When you get into the kind of the food-based feedstocks and looking at the indirect land use change aspects of those, that's where the modeling of the ag sector and the international impacts get quite involved and complicated and can take a long time. The third criteria there is near-term increase in renewable fuel use and kind of especially substantial volumes, and this kind of gets toward prioritizing drop-in biofuels, fuels that aren't as limited by some of blending or infrastructure constraints. And that's not to say we're not making a judgment here that that we don't, you know, about all the renewable fuels that meet the requirements are important to us, but just in terms of prioritizing which reviews we're going to put at the top of the pile, we feel like the drop-in biofuels are worth giving some consideration, because they can be used right away with existing infrastructure. And of course, we do consider date of submission and also how close these petitions are to commercialization. Sometimes we receive petitions for pathways that are, very much in this still kind of R&D phase, and other times we receive petitions for pathways that are really ready to go, ready to be commercialized, and it makes sense to give some consideration to that. Finally, as part of the program announcement also, we encourage stakeholders, the public, to give us input or suggestions on how we can improve this process. Our goals here are make it more efficient, transparent process, and just generally improve public service through the process, making it streamlined and providing better outcomes. So we welcome your input. We have this email support line that we encourage you to use, and just put petition process input in the subject line, and that'll get circulated into the right people. I'm sure I'll probably see all of the suggestions that come in eventually. In particular, I think for folks on this call, one of the things that I would be interested in feedback on is some thoughts on how to deal with feedstocks that are still in that kind of R&D phase, very new feedstocks where there's maybe less data and uncertainty is high. One of the things we struggle with is that sometimes we get petitions from companies that are in that R&D phase, and they come to us and they want us to evaluate their petition, and they say that EPA approval is important for them to get their next round of funding, which we understand, but it's also there's a conflict there, because it's also the fact that there's less experience with the feedstock means that there's less data, there's more uncertainty. So it becomes harder sometimes for us to have the data we need to complete our analysis, and to go through a public comment process and make sure that we have a strong justification for an approval. So I would definitely welcome input on that kind of dilemma that we face. So that concludes my presentation. I'll look forward to what questions or thoughts folks have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate the discussion there on the petition process and the pathways and the challenges that EPA has dealt with since this was first came to being back in, I guess, 2010. Early on, I apologize for putting you in Washington, D.C. and not in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Good luck to your teams as they move to NCAA. But we're gonna hold off questions right now. We're gonna hold all questions to the end. If you do have any questions, please send them to Helene, either through a private chat window or the public chat window, whatever. She'll be collecting those questions and she'll sort through them, and we'll do those at the end when we get through with our second speaker there. So everybody, please, you got a good question, go ahead and send it in Helene there. Thanks again, Aaron, and we'll be talking here in a moment during the Q&A session. Our next speaker is Doug Rivers. Let me move us. There we go. Our next speaker, Dr. Douglas Rivers. As we move beyond cornstarch and soy oils to include other biomass feedstocks that can be converted into next-generation biofuels, companies will need experienced scientists and technicians to navigate the regulatory and evaluation process. Our next speaker, Dr. Rivers, has done just that. Dr. Rivers is the Director of Research and Development for ICM, Inc. at its R&D facility in St. Joseph, Missouri, and he will share with us his experiences in navigating the pathway approval process. Dr. Rivers, I want to thank you for joining us today, and we certainly appreciate having you on this webinar, and turning the session over to you.
In working our way through some of the pathway approval process. Let's see if I can get this to work. So I want to talk about the pathway approval process, as we said, and I basically want to walk you through kind of how we've gone about it and and then talk about some of our experiences. So clearly, Aaron mentioned at the end of his presentation the issue with experimental processes and feedstocks, and how you get through those, and what data you need to be able to have an effective petition to the EPA. We happen to be in that boat, and one of the things that we started out doing a couple of years ago is working on the use of cellulosic grain fibers, particularly those that come from corn, since there are a lot of corn ethanol plants out there that already have this feedstock delivered to their plant every day. And so we came up with a process scheme that we felt like would be effective from an energy usage standpoint, and would also have a good capital cost benefit, and as well as, of course, producing cellulosic ethanol, which you can see in the cartoon on the screen, that just with the addition of the ability to get that fiber separated from the corn or milo kernel, and then be able to pre-treat it, hydrolyze it, and run it right back into the main plant system. This can add some good benefits to a plant and increase productivity. So obviously we had to do some work to do that, so we had to take a look at what the existing ethanol process was, and how the various modifications to that process would influence energy usage and product outputs from that process. And so this general schematic shows how you could put in a separation system between the slurry and liquefaction steps in an existing grain ethanol plant. You could also put it between the liquefaction and fermentation steps too, if you wanted to, and there are some benefits to doing it in either place. Well, this allows you to separate this fiber out, as I mentioned you'd want to do in the previous slide, so that you could actually go in a multiple different directions. Well, the one that we're interested here would be using that fiber to produce cellulosic ethanol. So the center line right here is the one that you'd want to be following. But it does give plant owners and operators the ability to be able to pull different levers in different economic conditions to be able to be as economically viable as their process can be. So one of the things you have to have, again, Aaron mentioned data, so it's very difficult if you're only at the lab scale to get the right kind of data, because I think Aaron would agree with me that you've got to be able to have a material and energy balance for the process. And the laboratory scale, it's just nigh on to impossible to get the kind of data that you're going to have to present the EPA with a credible pathway proposal. And so one of the things that we were able to do, we're fortunate that we have a DOE-funded integrated biorefinery pilot plant in our facility, in our development facility, and all of the tankage on here, except for the large 535,000-gallon tanks, are all within our pilot facility. The large ones, we happen to be located next to an existing 50 million gallon per year corn ethanol plant. So we were able to do some things to show an entire mass and energy balance around an integrated plant, from feedstock receipt through ethanol distillation. And so we were able to do this at pilot scale and at full commercial scale, which is a little bit unusual. We happen to have an unusual situation that allowed us to do that. But you can see in the chart that when converting both xylose and glucose that could be produced from the cellulosic fiber, we got an average of 9.7% increase in yield per bushel attributable to that cellulosic feedstock. If we only converted the glucose, which would mean using a conventional existing yeast, we got about an average of a 7% yield increase over a control fermentation. So those are the kind of things, along with the entire mass and energy balance, that the EPA is going to want to see, I believe, to show what you're doing with your greenhouse gas emissions and what your real energy utilization or conservation numbers might be for your proposed pathway. So, we map that out. We refer to this process as a generation 1.5 ethanol, since we're utilizing cellulosic fibers coming from the corn kernel. So, basically, this process utilizes a standard grain ethanol process, except that right at this point, we include a step to separate the fiber away from the flow through the plant. That allows us to take that fiber down across and through pretreatment, and then into a hydrolysis and fermentation tank that provides a low beer concentration, and that then is used as part of the makeup for the main fermentation in the plant. The other thing that this does, as we pull this fiber out in the separation area, is it debottlenecks the rest of the plant. So as you go through your liquefaction and your distillation, you've now removed all this fiber from this stream. So now you actually have less solids and less bulk going through your system, so it actually allows you to produce more ethanol in that system without increasing distillation capacity, for example, or mole sieve capacity out here. And at the same time, getting up to a 10% average yield increase attributable to cellulosic materials. So we put a pathway together for this, and we showed in our pathway that we submitted to EPA, and it's been in for quite a while. And we showed an average minimum improvement in greenhouse gas of 70% over the baseline gasoline fuel. So clearly qualifying for a D3 cellulosic RIN. The other thing I'd like to tie in then is that in the interim, since we proposed our pathway, the EPA has proposed a rule to allow the utilization of corn kernel fiber as a cellulosic feedstock for D3 RIN purposes. And this is something that is now in the comment phase. So it's important for people, I think, to look for these rule proposals by the EPA and make sure that they do make comments on it. It's a good way to be involved in the process, and we've certainly found that to be true and valuable. And in that process, we actually had conference calls with a number of different industry stakeholders that had an interest in how the process might work. How would you determine what new ethanol production is actually coming from cellulosic feedstock that's already in there mixed together with starch versus existing starch, or just improvement in starch efficiencies. And so out of that, there were some agreements that were kind of common to the industry, where people kind of agreed across the board. There were other areas where there were clear differences from organization to organization as to how we wanted to determine that and how strict we felt like the EPA should be in defining the rule, because there is some starch that you're never going to get if you don't get the cellulosic part. So there's a little bit of a debate and room for flexibility there, I think, in the rule. But from my perspective, in the comments that we did, we actually provided a fairly detailed set of comments to the EPA. But I think it's also important that you focus on the EPA requests, and they have things that they need if they're going to be able to move forward. There were clearly, in going back and looking at the web page of the comments and all, a lot of the comments, I probably shouldn't say this, but they were just frankly political statements and didn't even really relate to the requests by the EPA. And frankly, that, as Aaron said, they have limited resources, and that just wastes the EPA's time, and it delays things from getting these rules processed and out there where they can benefit producers. And I think it was also important to talk about how the ability to implement these rules and having something that is relatively simple, that doesn't require a lot of enforcement activities from the EPA or anyone else. So we felt like those were all very important. And I guess kind of to show the importance of being involved in these processes where you have a stake in it. We've actually had a follow-up phone conversation with the team that's working on this rule at their request, and we've been able to provide some inputs there to describe further how we feel like the system that we suggested and tried to detail in writing might be actually implemented. So I believe that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So I guess Brent, if you want to take back over.
I got it. Hey, I thank you. I appreciate you giving your insights and experiences you've had at ICM and the work y'all are doing to create new pathways, new efficiencies to biofuel production. Hopefully good luck with y'all as y'all continue to move forward the process.
Thank you.
Helene has been collecting questions from the webinar participants, and if she's on the line, I'm going to let her take over and provide those to our panelists, Aaron and Dr. Rivers.
Well, Brent, so far I have not received any questions, but I have received questions from our previous webinars that I would like to ask, I guess, Dr. Rivers, you can always respond to, but I guess this would be more for Aaron. Since, the IBIS grant, and we're looking at the Southeast, we're mostly looking at, what resources are available to us. Obviously, to Dr. Rivers, it's corn. Feedstock is, plentiful there. Our feedstock that we're looking at is, woody biomass. So a lot of questions that I receive is, what type of woody biomass can you use? Is slash okay? Is there a certain diameter size? Does it have to be less than 4 inches? Does pulpwood qualify? So I didn't know if maybe you could explain that, to me personally and possibly to the audience.
Okay. I'll try my best. Let me start by saying I think both your question and also Dr. Rivers' presentation, I think, gets at an important point, is that the petition process, a key part of it is evaluating the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of the pathway. And sometimes that is when we have to do, full ag sector modeling and stuff, that can be the most time-intensive part. In some other pathways, the life cycle analysis is fairly straightforward, but it's kind of more the compliance or implementation side questions. For example, in the case of the corn kernel fiber issues, it becomes a matter of how do we track how much of the biofuel came from the corn kernel fiber versus other feedstocks. And so sometimes basically the point I'm trying to make is the compliance and kind of tracking and record keeping issues can be just as important as the life cycle analysis. And that also gets to some of the questions you're asking, Helene, about, what types of woody biomass qualify. Those, some of those are life cycle questions, but a lot of them are compliance questions. And they get to what's qualified as renewable biomass under our statute. So the regulations list a number of types of woody biomass that are already qualified for cellulosic biofuel pathways, things like forest residue, slash thinnings, are qualified. Pulpwood from kind of whole trees that would be used, either saw timber or pulpwood, is not currently an approved pathway. It is something that we are evaluating, and as you can perhaps understand, that's a very complicated analysis that we've had ongoing for a while now. We've been using forestry sector models and collecting data to try to look at what are the impacts of using, pulpwood, for example, from a southeast loblolly pine plantation. What are the life cycle greenhouse gas impacts of that? We're still in the modeling process on that. But if there's more specific questions about, I don't think our regulations talk about diameters of or things like that. It's more qualified in terms of what land is it coming from. It has to be non-federal forests, and it talks about things like, where's that wood coming from and what would its otherwise use be. So it's more, is it slash pre-commercial thinning, tree residue, those kind of things. And if there's more detailed questions than that, I might actually have to refer folks to people in our compliance division who handle those types of questions.
Okay, great. So I guess it seems or appears that a lot of record keeping would be necessary if, I guess, the pulpwood petition was approved, that it'd be just, I guess, up to the company to keep track of where they're getting their material from. And would that be something that you guys could audit or would have to check annually? I'm just kind of curious on how it would work if things did receive approval.
Right. Again, there certainly would be record keeping and reporting requirements associated with that, and I'm actually not the best person to talk to about that because I focus more on the life cycle greenhouse gas side. Folks in our compliance division would be able to address that more directly. I know that they're also been working on some new kind of ways to do that through a quality assurance program type thing with third-party auditors that's under development. So that might be a good topic for a future webinar, but unfortunately I don't know if I can address more detail than that for you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It seems like I guess tricky with a lot of the compliance requirements, and then as far as definitions, and then also meeting the 50% reduction for advanced biofuels and greenhouse gas emissions. But I guess one last point I'd kind of like to make on this is if you did receive, if a company was approved to use pulpwood and they were able to prove that it met the greenhouse gas reduction emissions, if that feedstock's approved, does the next facility that would like to use that feedstock, do they have to go through the same process and provide you with data, or would that be okay? Would pulpwood just be accepted?
So that gets towards what I mentioned in my presentation about kind of the difference between generally applicable pathways and company-specific pathways. The generally applicable pathways, ones that we list in our regulations as just a generally approved pathway, would apply to any company, and it's not restricted by geography really. Any company using that feedstock in that production process for a specific fuel type can use the pathway. As I said, we have done some company-specific determinations for petitions, and where it only applies to one company because they're using a kind of a proprietary process. But we do say, and even in those company-specific pathways, we do say that other companies who can demonstrate that they're using the same process and pathway could qualify for it. But in that case, they would have to provide, that additional company would have to come forward with some of the same types of data for a petition, a mass and energy balance and thing to show, and a process flow diagram to show that they're using that same process.
Okay, so it may just be a little easier for the next person. After
just one thing on that. Yeah, for the pulpwood pathway that we're evaluating, I think our intention is to make that a generally applicable pathway. We'll have to go through a full notice and comment process, and I'm not going to try to guess at the timeline for that, but our intention and goal there is to make it generally applicable.
Okay, Aaron, I have some questions that have been typed to me. So, and it's kind of addressing the same issue with, the pulpwood. So these questions are similar. They're from two separate folks, but they said, have you looked at using a forest certification system to address the sustainability of using tree pulp wood removals? I guess they comment also, this may help to ensure that pulpwood's not removed and land converted to other uses. And I guess another suggestion was that maybe FSC or third-party auditing and chain of custody models may help, I guess, with this kind of record keeping and also, where the material is coming from. Have you guys considered that maybe with the whole review that you're doing now with pulpwood?
Couple of things. So forest certification, I think, right now we're working on, modeling and getting kind of a general understanding of our estimate of life cycle emissions from using those feedstocks. Like I said, it'll be a public comment process, and we could look at, I think we could certainly look at that and see, how that might forest certification could be factored into the life cycle. One of the challenges we face, this comes up sometimes with other feedstocks, is that because of the definition of life cycle emissions to include significant indirect emissions, it's kind of when we define feedstocks crop by crop, and whether it's less important how one farmer or one group is producing their feedstock when you're looking at the indirect impacts, because what happens is when you basically, especially take a food feedstock for example, when you divert that feedstock from being used as a food or a feed crop and divert it to a biofuel, the indirect impact of that is going to be who steps up to increase production to kind of backfill that demand, or what are the market responses to that. And so whether or not the original producer of the feedstock was, a sustainable farmer becomes somewhat less important than who are the new producers that come into the market because of that. So that's not to say that forest certification isn't something we could look at, but it's one of the challenges we face because of the wide scope that our life cycle analysis has to cover. And the other question, I guess the chain of custody tracking. I do believe that our regulations, the way that some of the feedstock verification that it's renewable biomass, I do believe that there's some chain of custody kind of reporting and record keeping that's involved in that. But again, I'm just not the expert on that piece of our program.
Okay, thank you. Brent, would you like to add anything? Don't have too many questions, but.
Yeah, I guess just sort of a quick point brought it up. I saw within the last week or two where the California Air Resources Board is considering to reduce their indirect land use change penalty for certain biofuels, biodiesel, corn-based ethanol, and others. I think even sugarcane. How is what CARB is doing impacting the decision-making process at your shop?
Yeah, good question. We talk with the folks at CARB who are working on that. We actually have biweekly calls with them, and I tuned in for a good portion of the public workshop that they did, where they shared some of their initial new results, which do, I guess, tend to show lower indirect land use change emissions from their modeling than they had in 2009. In general, their new results are, for a lot of the feedstocks, are pretty close to where we were originally. But I'll say, we're definitely following it closely. We do realize, that our analysis was completed in 2010, and we're definitely looking at ways and thinking carefully about about whether and how to update our modeling and incorporate new data. I think any sort of update to that analysis would something we wouldn't take that lightly. It would be an extensive process, and so I guess I would just say we're definitely paying attention to all that, but no announcements to make on that today.
Okay.
I was curious, Dr. Rivers, if you're still on the line, how long do you think would you say it took you to do this petition process? Like, when did you begin, and where are you now, and everything?
I think the actual process of putting the pathway proposal together took us in the vicinity of 3 months to do, and that was after we'd done all of the experimentation and had data collected and all of that. So actually going through the modeling and with your material and energy balances and all, and then putting it down into a written package that makes sense from the standpoint of telling the story effectively so that it's easily understood by those that are reviewing it. I mean, we've been doing experimentation for quite a period of time in the area, so it does take time. It does. I do think you have to be at a scale that's larger than laboratory. I think you at least have to be at some reasonable pilot scale to be able to get a fully integrated process in that uses commercial style equipment to make sure that you're getting the same kinds of results that you got in the laboratory, because oftentimes they can be very different for the better and for the worse. We are still waiting on feedback on our submission, and I think probably that's due to the fact that there is a rule now a draft rule that's out that would cover the area. So I think from my perspective at least, that all makes sense. If the rule goes through and corn kernel fiber, grain sorghum fiber, wheat fiber, whatever fiber that might be attached to a grain, if that's all approved, then you should be in good shape. So I guess I don't have a lot of heartburn that our particular pathway proposal has not been. We've not got any feedback yet because of the fact that there is a draft rule on the table that would include that feedstock that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. So I guess it goes back to what Aaron was saying with the whole research and development phase and how it's just difficult to try to submit your application to the EPA for a field petition pathway when you lack data. So it appears to me that as far as the Southeast is concerned, that we kind of are in that phase right now, and I think another problem is just a lot of the definitions as far as our resource availability with the EISA definition for what's acceptable from woody biomass. I think there's a lot of land restrictions and a lot of things that could be worked out there, but I'm not sure how. I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I could comment, Helene, I think the good news on the woody biomass end is that there are at least a couple of pilot or demonstration scale projects that have been funded through the DOE that are in place or are about to become in place that will actually have a woody biomass to ethanol or other end products as the product pathway. So there will be data available at that point that I'm sure will go before the EPA if there's not an existing rule that covers these materials today.
Okay, great, thank you. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in. As far as I know, I don't have any questions. Brent, do you want to add anything else?
No question. I just think today's topic is important. It's sort of that quiet piece that happens behind the scenes. We're all enthralled and excited about seeing large distilleries, refineries, biorefineries rise from the ground and sit against a nice backdrop of a clear blue sky and thinking about all the jobs and the economic impact and the resource utilization those things will provide. But before you can get there and commit to that level of investment, there's a lot of work that goes on the front end that people like Aaron and Dr. Rivers are involved in to even get to that point where the economic developers can have their big ribbon cutting and photo ops and things like that. So I just want to say I appreciate the work you guys are doing, and I know not a lot of people are aware of everything that goes into this, and that the compliance and regulatory aspects that they're on the front end of significant biofuels project development. So I thank y'all for taking the time today and sharing this type of information with everybody.
I agree. Thank you, Aaron and Dr. Rivers.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I was glad to participate and contribute.
Well, that will close our Q&A. And again, it's a great topic. The development of advanced biofuels is still in research and development, and we are eventually going to get to the commercial scale production. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating. Recording of this webinar will be available at the forestrywebinars.net page. Also wanted to inform everyone of our next webinar will be on April 30th, and this is going to involve growing short rotation woody crops on wastewater treatment application sites. And we're going to add in some other phytoremediation techniques that are being used. I added a picture here to the slide here. So if you want to receive updates about when webinars are occurring, you can subscribe and select the type of information that type of webinars that you'd like to attend. And just let you know that there are a lot of topics on the webinar portal, not just bioenergy. So if you're interested in wildlife or forestry in general, you can subscribe to other topics as well. And the website there to get some forestry webinars is just www.forestrywebinars.net. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending. And Brent, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I don't. I just want to say thank you on there. Thanks to everybody, and hope they join us on future webinars.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to send the link if you guys accidentally closed out that page for the step 2 if you're applying for continuing education credits, and also the link will take you to a post survey, and I appreciate all the feedback. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.